Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today, I'm very excited because it is the last issue of Volume 2 of Swamp Thing, which is number 171. And I gotta say, this whole run was pretty freaking amazing. I had a blast reading it with you guys, and hopefully y'all had fun too. But before we get into that, just a little catch up on what's been going on. Swamp Thing has gone through the trials of all of the different parliaments of the earth. So now he has all the powers of earth, wind, fire, and water. And all the previous issues of this storyline was Swamp Thing waiting to complete the final trial, which was for the Parliament of Flames, which he did in the last issue. And that trial consisted of defeating the Word of God and supposedly giving up all of his humanity. And upon completing that, he shot directly to the sun, which is where the Parliament of Flames is located. And he spoke to this flaming dragon, who gave him dominion over the flames, and then sent Swamp Thing back to Earth. And that's where we left off, with Swamp Thing embodying the Earth and looking like he was going to destroy it. So first things first, with issue 171, we got the cover. We see a spacey Swamp Thing, meaning he is made up of like space dust, and we see he's looking down very serenely as he kind of cradles Earth in his hands. We also see on the cover that this is written by Mark Millar, with art by Phil Hester and Kim DeMolder. Oh, and I should also say that this cover is by John Totalbin, who did much of the Alan Moore run with Stephen Bissett, and oh my gosh, this is an amazing cover. I would love to have this original on my wall. In fact, DC should totally make this a poster because it's freaking awesome. But anyway, we cut to the first page, and it looks like this is the moment that Swamp Thing has come back to the Earth from the sun, and he has taken over the Earth with his powers. We get a couple panels of what's going on, and we see some police officers in the middle of a park looking very scared with their guns drawn as plants shoot out all around them. And then we get a city street view where we see people running as the clouds above them form Swamp Thing's face. And over these panels, we get some Swamp Thing narration that says, "In Central Park, they stand upon my grass and breathe my air as they point their weapons at the trees and shrubs which sprout from my hide. The humans are fighting back. They have been warned I will no longer tolerate their presence, but do not realize what I have become. They could never hope to understand. I was the Swamp God, Wood Elemental, Good Gumbo Man, the spirit of the bayous. I had a wife and a child who loved me, but now I have so much more. The mountains quake beneath my feet. Air and water feed my body, and fire burns like a furnace in my heart. I am everything all at once. Nothing exists that can stop me." Then we turn the page and we get some more panels of what's going on Earth. And in this first panel, we see the President of the United States looking very worried as he holds his head in his hand and leans against the window frame in the Oval Office. Then we get a panel of what looks like a war-torn country where we see people who don't look like they're even noticing Swamp Thing's taken over or anything because they're still in the middle of their war. So we see some bad guys with guns watching a man bury some children and other dead people in a big pit. And over these panels, Swamp Thing's narration continues saying, "Those who find the apocalypse most difficult to come to terms with are the parasites who have been elected to positions of power. They might watch the world from their Oval Offices and space satellites, but they control me with no more authority than a flea might rule a dog. A concept they are only beginning to realize. The passing of this species is no loss. They are a sick virus determined to destroy themselves and those around them, designed to achieve anything, but choosing instead to do nothing. They will be remembered only for their holocausts and rape camps, their starving millions and intrinsic cruelty to their fellow man. The new race shall not mourn them." Then we turn the page and we get two more panels. The first one takes place in Glasgow, and we see in the city there were people gathered around some street performers, but they have stopped listening to the accordion man playing, and they are just pointing up to the sky. And I believe there's a little Easter egg here because one of the people that looks scared definitely resembles a young Mark Millar. And there might also be a young Grant Morrison in this crowd too. And then we see the people that were inside of Swamp Thing's garden in his palace. So they're kind of like a weird cult that revolves around him. And they're looking very excited as they look up. And I should mention that the head of this cult definitely looks like David Koresh from the Branch Davidians cult that was in Waco, Texas in the 90s. And over these panels, Swamp Thing narrates, "I am the angry earth, grown tired of its dominant species. I am each and every victim staring back at the burning skies, the fear in their hearts. I am the Glasgow busker, the accordion strapped to his back, his fingers on the keys, the coins in his pocket, every single bristle upon his chin, the street signs, the bricks, the mortar. I am the bayous, the frog spawn in the water, the shallows in the trees, the religious cult who prayed for this moment, the tears upon their cheeks. Perhaps they hope to flatter me with their hymns and prayers, cherishing the belief I might spare them when I cleansed the earth of their kind. I am the disappointment in their hearts." Then we turn the page and we get two more panels of horrible things happening in the world. And in the first panel, we see a family that looks pretty starved, and they are about to boil a cat in a large pot. And in the second panel, we see a priest who has slit his wrists on a toilet and is dying out slowly. And over these panels, the narration continues saying, "I am the continents, the Asias, its individual countries, its villages and markets, the animals crying in their baskets, the cat meat on the counters, the ground beneath their feet. This is the scenario the flora in their guts have always tried to feed to their brains. The moment when the earth would refuse to accept any more pain and destroy its tormentors. I am the avalanche waiting to fall, the potential earthquake in China. I stir the wind and a storm brews in Miami. I am the pressure in every volcano. This is the end, and everyone knows it. I can read the thoughts of the idiots huddled in their churches, taste the despair in every heart of every suicide. God is real, and he is me." Then we get a panel of Manhattan, and we see everybody in the middle of the street freaking out, looking up at the sky and pointing. And in the middle of all those people, we see the girl Maggie from the Parliaments of Vapor storyline, and she is now pregnant with Jim Rook's child. And if you remember, at the end of that storyline, there was something said by L. Senior Blake about her and Jim Rook's baby being the new Messiah, but they never really brought that up again, so I just wanted to mention it because it does come into play a little bit later. So as her and everybody stares up at the sky, pointing and looking terrified, Swamp Thing's narration continues, saying, "I am Manhattan, the people in the street, the pregnant woman gazing up at me, the baby in her womb. I am every day of her pregnancy and her fears for a child who will never see the sun. I am the night, 24 hours of every day, 7 days of every week, 365 days of every year. The calendar." Then we get a panel of the Earth from space, and the narration continues. "I am the world, the Earth spinning on its axis, the atmosphere which surrounds it, the clouds floating overhead, the flat fish swimming at the bottom of the sea. I am every word and plant and animal emotion dating back almost 5 billion years. I am rock becoming solid, oceans forming. I. And we turn the page and we get some panels that are like flashes of people we've seen throughout this arc. We see the mysterious traveler in the first panel, and then we see Abigail Arcane, then L. Senior Blake, then Timothy Ravenwyn, then Don Roberto, and finally Constantine. And each of these panels have their own narration. So over the travelers, it says, "I am the traveler, his ancient robes, the 2 ravens awaiting his command, the gift in his pocket. I am the lightning in his eye. Abigail, her worn denim jeans, the sadness in her heart, her loneliness, the sense of guilt she will always carry, each individual strand of her hair. El Senior Blake, the blackness in his soul, the plaque upon his teeth. I am the tornado gathering force outside, the worm in his tequila.
I am the last of the Ravenwind witches, his lovers sleeping indoors, the sense of deja vu he feels as he looks at the sky. Don Roberto, the shirt he's wearing, his first-class ticket, the airport around him, the oxygen and nitrogen compound filling the air. I am the smoke from Constantine's last cigarette, curling in his lungs, his anger at his own stupidity, and his powerful regret.
And the humans in these panels, like Constantine, Abigail, and Timothy, they all look like they're in despair because they did not want this end to happen. They believe Swamp Thing is destroying the Earth right now. But Don Roberto, the mysterious traveler, and El Senior Blake, they just look normal, like they're not really worried about anything, because they wanted this reset to happen. Then we turn the page and we cut to Maggie again in Manhattan, and she is crying as she stands in the crowd of people who are running. And then someone calls out her name from behind her saying, "Maggie?" And then that person reaches out and touches her shoulder, and she freaks out at this and turns around and says, "Get your hands off me!" But as she wheels around, we see that it is Anton Arcane standing there, and he says to her, "Please, there's no need to be afraid. I'm here to make sure you reach the hospital safely. You can call me Anton. Everything's going to be okay." And then he embraces her, and Swamp Thing narrates over those two last panels, "I am Arcane. Anton Arcane." Then we turn the page, and we cut to a room or a place that is full of geometric shapes, and it looks like Swamp Thing has just been brought here because he looks confused. And hovering in the room, there are multiple different beings. Each of them are a different color, and each of them has a round orb that is floating above their body. And I'm saying the word body loosely because it's pretty much just a torso with arms, and each of them have some sort of cape that's hanging down, but there's no lower half of their body. And then where their head should be are where these orbs are floating. And the one that's hovering in front of Swamp Thing says,
"Welcome to the Parliament of Worlds."
And Swamp Thing doesn't say anything. He is completely dumbstruck at what he's looking at, and the being that welcomed him asks Swamp Thing,
"What's wrong? Has it been so long since we last saw one another that you no longer recognize us? Surely you haven't forgotten your old friends."
And Swamp Thing answers,
I'm not sure. This is all so difficult to take in right now. Why do I look like this? I thought I had become the world."
And the being answers,
"You are the world, the third planet from the sun. Look closely at your body and you'll see what I mean. The Americans lie upon your chest. Africa spreads across your back. Every life on planet Earth is frozen in your skin while we hold this conversation. Examine your own geography."
So Swamp Thing does that, and he looks down at his body and he sees exactly what the being told him. There is America on his chest and Africa on his back. And when Swamp Thing's done examining himself, he walks forward towards the being speaking to him and he asks,
"Who am I speaking to?"
And the being replies,
"Me? I'm the Red World with the impressive canals, an old friend who has monitored your progress these billion-plus years and hoped Alec Holland would succeed where the others failed. Mars, your closest neighbor."
And apparently Swamp Thing is not very impressed that he's talking to another planet. I guess because he was on a mission to do the whole eradication of humans and everything and restart the Earth. So he says to Mars,
"I don't care who you are or which elite order you represent. Humanity has committed atrocities against nature and must be punished."
And to this Mars replies,
"Oh, come now. Think for a moment. Your desire to annihilate the human race is only a leftover emotion from Alec Holland, an adolescent guilt trip. Search your feelings. Tell the truth. Do you really want to murder these people?"
So Swamp Thing takes a minute and he does think, and then he replies sheepishly,
"No, not anymore. Not since I saw the world through their eyes and experienced their hopes and fears as if they were my own. I cannot hate them no matter how hard I try."
So it seems Swamp Thing embodying all of the different people and everything about the Earth made him not want to kill them. And then Swamp Thing stands up like a burden has been taken off his shoulders, and he says to Mars,
"It's funny. One man stood out from the rest when I became the earth. His name was Arcane, and if ever there was a reason to wipe out mankind, he was it. Yet even Arcane had hope inside. Don't you understand? I cannot erase mankind from the face of the earth, when even the worst among them has potential.
And Mars says to this,
This feeling you describe, we've all been there. You achieved global consciousness, and every living thing upon you feels it too. Only the enlightened worlds may take their place in this parliament. Now Earth has membership. If only Oa had lived to see this day.
And just in case you don't know what Oa is, that is the planet where the Green Lantern rings were made. And I guess by now it was destroyed, I believe, when Hal Jordan went crazy and turned into Parallax and destroyed a bunch of the Green Lantern Corps. So in this comic, that's actually like a recent thing where Oa was part of this parliament until about a year or two ago. So as Swamp Thing thinks about what he just heard from Mars, he looks around and he says,
Where are we? Surely this isn't the heart of the universe. It looks like an old, empty hospital.
And Mars answers,
None of this has any material base. What we're standing in is a four-dimensional map designed to help Alec Holland find his next incarnation.
And Swamp Thing is confused and he asks,
Alec Holland? But Holland is dead.
And Mars replies,
Only his shade has died and gone to heaven. His spirit is what inspired you to unite the earth and reach the Parliament of Worlds. Now it is time for you to go your separate ways.
And what Swamp Thing has heard has just made him more confused, and he says,
What? What are you talking about?
And Mars answers,
Perhaps you should ask him yourself.
And the second he says that, the spirit of Alec Holland bursts out of Swamp Thing's body. And then Alec turns and looks at Swamp Thing and says, Jesus, it's hard to believe I'm standing right here in front of you, seeing everything from this perspective again. You seem so huge. No wonder people were scared of you. And Swamp Thing smiles and reaches out and puts his hand on Alec's shoulder, and he says,
All those years, all the madness we went through together, has everything we've suffered and cried for finally come true?
And Alec smiles up at him and says, Yeah, I guess the good guys actually won for a change. This is the end of the road, man. And then Swamp Thing begins to cry, and he says,
Alec, I don't know what to say.
And then Alec reaches out and shakes Swamp Thing's hand, and he says, Me neither. There's a million things in my head, but nothing I can put into words. Maybe we should say goodbye, kind of civilized, and shake hands. And as they do that, Alec begins to cry as well, and then him and Swamp Thing give each other a big hug, and as they embrace, Swamp Thing says,
Making love, watching TV, clipping your fingernails, combing your hair. All those little things you remember are already fading, Alec. I'm not strong enough to hold them on my own. What am I going to do without you?
And Alec answers, You won't be without me. I promise. And then he lets go of Swamp Thing, and as he walks away, he says, No one will ever be alone again. And Swamp Thing isn't sure what Alec meant by that, so he says,
Wait, I don't understand.
Then we get this interesting panel of Alec walking through the doors of a maternity ward, and I guess because this is like the fourth dimension or whatever, anything can be anything, but I believe this is just pointing to what's happening on Earth with Maggie and her pregnancy. And as Alec walks through the doors of the maternity ward, he turns to reply to Swamp Thing, who said he didn't understand, and he says, You will. Then we turn the page, and we cut to the vastness of the universe, and we see planets and stars, and they are hovering in the void. And in this vastness, we do see the death of a red sun, and then the spark of a white dwarf coming to life, and finally a new star is born. And over these panels, the narration says, There was a time before time began, when there was harmony in the universe, when we all existed as a single mass at the instant of the Big Bang. This mass was ruptured. The galaxies began to cluster.
Stars were born and the first signs of life appeared as the planets took shape. 20 billion years ago, we were a single organism and there was nothing in existence that we didn't know because we were everything. There were no languages or countries, no continents or worlds, just a collective consciousness which the superstitious might call supreme. Now this God is dead, splintered into infinity, but for a moment when the enlightened worlds take part in spiritual communion, he is alive again. Every living thing throughout the universe is illuminated for a fraction of a second and knows how it feels to be everything at once. A new star forms to mark the occasion. Then we turn the page and we cut back to Earth, where this new star is very, very bright in the night sky, and specifically it's hanging above somewhere in New York. And Swamp Thing's narration says, "Somewhere in Manhattan, a child is born. He is the first of the new race I hoped might replace mankind. But he came here to teach, not to conquer. The Star Child has been expected for a number of years, and careful preparations have already been made for his future." Then we see inside of the hospital where this child is being born, there are the three supernatural men, the mysterious traveler, Don Roberto, and El Senior Blake. And with them, they have brought gifts to this newborn. The traveler has Jim Rook's sword, El Senior Blake has Sargon's gem, and Don Roberto has a copy of River Run. And over this, Swamp Thing's narration continues, saying, "First among the gifts his visitor brings is the Ruby of Life. Once the treasured possession of Sargon the Sorcerer, it represents the element Earth. The second is the revised and completed River Run, a volume of short stories spanning this world and its every alternative, written by a water spirit. Third is the Nightmaster's Sword of Truth, intellect and reason forged together in cold hard steel, and the elemental symbol of air. The gift of fire is still unaccounted for." Then we cut to the waiting room of this hospital, and we see John Constantine strike one of his matches, and he's lighting a cigarette. And if you remember, he was supposed to be giving the gift of fire to this newborn, which was in the form of those magic wishing matches. Then we see the mysterious traveler, El Senior Blake, and Don Roberto come out of the recovery area, and they sit down in the waiting room next to John, and the mysterious traveler is giving John the evil eye, and he says, "A magical matchstick capable of making any wish come true. And what does Constantine choose to do with it? He lights a cigarette. Somebody tell me he isn't serious." And John fires back, "Oi, leave it out. These buggers are highly addictive. You never read the warning side of the packet?" And a very annoyed Don Roberto says to John, "Please, the Star Child was born to unite the world. Perhaps we should honor him by not bickering among ourselves like old women." And John smiles at that, and he says, "He's the one who's out of order, mate. I'm only here to pass the time and see if there's mums who need a shoulder to cry on. Which reminds me, anyone decide to name this new messiah you gents are so excited about?" And El Senior Blake answers, "Alex his name. Girl decided to call him Alec." And John smiles at this and says, "Now there's a surprise." Then from behind them, another voice says, "A soul descends from the heavens like a blessed raindrop, and a child is born unlike any other. This is indeed a time for friends and family to gather in celebration. But one wonders, would they appreciate the company of strangers?" And all of the men turn to see the phantom stranger standing there, and El Senior Blake does not look impressed, and he says, "Go on, Constantine. Tell him to piss off." And John replies, "Normally I'd be delighted, Squire. I'd boot his phantom arse and ask him what public toilet he was hiding in while the rest of us were here in the shit. But not tonight." And Phantom Stranger asks, "And why the uncharacteristic compassion?" And John answers, "Don't know. Haven't the right bile now. Maybe little Buddha next door just pulled off his first major miracle and made me love my fellow man for one night and one night only. Christ, what I'm trying to say is, how about a big group hug?" And then John holds out his arms like he's going to give everybody a big hug, and the traveler, Don Roberto, and El Senior Blake look very worried and troubled by this. Then we turn the page, and we cut back to the swamps, where we see Swamp Thing is walking in his palace garden, and he's narrating, "Until the moment of illumination, I thought my purpose here was to protect the world from the worst excesses of mankind. Now I see this was only the last traces of my human ego looking for a role. No one has such moral authority. Right and wrong shift constantly, depending on one's perspective. Everyone upon the earth has the capacity to hurt or heal, and now that I've been inside every skin and looked through every pair of eyes, my fears for the future have been laid to rest. I share the hopes and dreams of the whole world, and every living thing around me shares them too. For a fraction of a second, every stockbroker knew how it felt to be every blade of grass. Every atom knew how it felt to be every starving baby. For the first time in so many years, the earth was whole, and everyone understood every consequence of every action they had ever undertaken. This is how the world will be saved." Then we get some panels of the cult followers walking through the garden, and they are picking up some of Swamp Thing's psychedelic tubers on the ground, and they are eating them. Then we see the after effects of the people eating these psychedelic yams, and we see lots of them are making love in the garden. And over these panels, Swamp Thing's narration continues saying, "My palace in the Louisiana swamps was intended to house the new species I was told would replace mankind. But now I realize this was only symbolic. There is no new race waiting in the wings to oust humanity, just a new way of thinking. The world has not become an overnight utopia, but already there has been a significant shift in the attitude of its people. The religious cult who camp among my lush gardens have begun a new calendar, which an ever-increasing number of converts are following. Policemen, scientists, soldiers, and politicians, people from all walks of life have turned their back upon the old ways and have come here to find the answer. But I tell them they miss the point. I built this kingdom of endless possibility to inspire, to offer a picture of how Earth could be if people want it badly enough. This world has experienced universal illumination, and nothing can stand in the way now, as each and every human reaches for the stars." Then we get some panels of Abby Arcane coming to the swamps and kind of watching Swamp Thing from afar, and Swamp Thing's narration continues. "Some weeks ago, Abby made an appearance. I heard her approach quietly, dried grass broken under her caterpillar boots. Molecules of carbon dioxide exhaled noisily in the air. She watched as I conversed in native tongue with the inhabitants of Frog Hollow, but said nothing despite realizing that I knew she was there. When we'd last spoken, she'd explained how much the outside world repelled her. Now I assumed she had returned to be on my side again, but I was wrong. She wasn't coming home. She watched me for a while and smiled when I turned around and looked at her. I couldn't think of anything to say and simply smiled back. Then she was gone." And in the last panel on this page, we see Abby fall back behind some bushes and disappear completely. Then we turn the page and we see some other areas of the swamp. And in the first panel, we see the Cajun people, and they look like they're returning. And Swamp Thing's narration over this says, "My palace is blessed with visitors from all over the world, but those I treasure most are the Cajuns who return here to their settlement." Then we get a panel of an interesting flower growing on the ground, and it seems to have a face that looks very reminiscent to Jason Woodrue. And Swamp Thing's narration continues. "The little boy who fed the people trees found the head of Jason Woodrue and buried it among the remains of his family. He tends the plant master daily, and I understand it's making excellent progress. As for Tefe, I'm told Tefe still holds a grudge." And we don't get a panel of her or anything, but I guess Tefe is still alive after Swamp Thing exploded her,
maybe because she can control flesh, she was able to build herself a new body. Then we get some panels of Abby walking back through the swamps, and as she's just about to arrive back at her car, we see a man standing in front of it, and it is Anton Arcane. And he says to her, "Abby?" And this stops Abby right in her tracks, and as she looks at Anton, Anton begins to cry and say, "I'm sorry, Abby. Sorry for everything." And then Abby walks over to him and gives him a hug. And you might be thinking, wow, I can't believe that Abby would forgive Anton Arcane. But earlier in the narration, Swamp Thing did say that everybody on Earth felt a connection with everything else, which created a greater understanding for all things on Earth towards one another. I guess except for Tefe, because she still holds a grudge, which definitely insinuates that she is not of this Earth in some way. Then we turn the page and we cut to Swamp Thing walking through the swamps, and he comes upon a dead bird, and I believe this is the same dead bird that Swamp Thing killed when he was trying to explain to Anton that life doesn't matter because we're all made of the same stuff, and dead things are part of the ecosystem the same as living things. So as Swamp Thing walks through the swamps and comes upon this bird, Swamp Thing's narration says, "The three figures who guided me to this moment, when the earth was at ease with itself, returned to their homelands and were never seen again. This was in order. Their job was done. However, one task remained to be completed. An old friend who died, so I might win some metaphysical argument with Anton Arcane about the meaning of good and evil. Taking my place upon the throne was inconceivable while he remained in this state." So we see Swamp Thing bend down to pick up this dead bird, and he holds it in his hands, and he concentrates, and his narration says, "I shut my eyes and held him close, whispering how much the world had missed him. And then he woke up." And we see Swamp Thing raise his hands to the sky as the bird stands up and comes to life, and then the bird leaves Swamp Thing's hand flying away into the sky. And that, my friends, is the end of Swamp Thing Volume 2. And don't worry, we will be continuing into Volume 3, but I am going to take a break for a while, because as you might have noticed, the format for this podcast kind of changed over time. Originally, I was just kind of flipping through the issues, talking about it, and having some drinks while I described to you what was on the page. But somewhere along the line, it turned into more of an audiobook style where I read you the dialogue and do voices and stuff. So I'm going to go back and re-record all the episodes that didn't have that kind of detail in them, which is all of Volume 1, and then Volume 2, Issues 1 through, I believe, 110. So as you can tell, that's quite a lot of issues to re-record, especially with this amount of detail. So I'm going to go on hiatus until I finish most of that, and then we will jump back into Swamp Thing Volume 3, and along with that, I'm going to launch this on its own podcast as well. So as the new re-recorded episodes come out, they will be released on a podcast I'm going to title The Sagas of Swamp Thing, and they will be released on their own feed now instead of on the Planes, Trains, and Comic Books podcast. And that's mainly just to help people who are looking for Swamp Thing content be able to find it easier when they search for it in their podcast platform of choice. So I'm not sure how long that hiatus will be, but I will make an announcement podcast letting you know when that new podcast launches, so you can go back and listen to the re-recorded versions, or if you just want to wait until I'm completely done re-releasing all the old ones, I will also announce in a podcast when Volume 3 is starting back up again. So with that, if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at Planes, Trains, and Comic Books, all one word, at gmail.com. And remember, until next time, stay swampy.